Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. It's your favorite history teacher back at you again with another historical video. Today, we start a new chapter, a new module, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to get right into it. The New Deal. There's a lot of notes to take today. So let's just, and my screen's not open. Hold up. Now let's go. Okay. Module 10, the New Deal, a big deal, a new deal, the New Deal. Yeah. All right. So today's a two-title note day, obviously. So make sure you put that New Deal at the Module 10 title at the top of your margin and this at the first line or whatever. A New Deal fights the Depression. Module 10, Lesson 1. That was your warm-up. Objectives. We're going to summarize the initial steps Roosevelt took to reform banking and finance, describe New Deal work programs, and identify critics of FDR's New Deal, because there were some haters. All right, FDR gets elected. So the 1932 presidential election showed Americans that they were clearly ready for a change. The Republicans renominated Hoover, but they recognized they had little chance of winning. Too many Americans blamed Hoover for doing too little about the Depression. They wanted somebody new. The Democrats pinned their hopes on the hopes of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was a two-term governor of New York and a distant cousin of former President Theodore Roosevelt. As governor, FDR proved to be an effective reform-minded leader working to combat unemployment and poverty. Unlike Hoover, FDR possessed a can-do attitude and projected an air of friendliness and confidence which attracted voters. Roosevelt won in overwhelming fashion, 23 million votes to 16 million votes for Hoover. In the Senate, the Democrats claimed 2/3 majority in the House, 3/4 majority, and had been the greatest victory since before the Civil War. Here are the election numbers. He lost 5 states out of the 48. That's good. All right, no days off. So back in the day, presidential elections occurred in November, and then they want to be inaugurated until March. Now, why is that? Maybe because there's this thing called winter, and they didn't want to have a big celebration in the cold. Well, that changed, and because there's too much time, there's 4 months, almost, 4 months that passed between November, almost 5, that passed between November to March. And so instead of having that like dead period of 4 months of doing nothing, they made a constitutional amendment changing the date for the inauguration. So that's why inaugurations happen in January. So 4 months would pass between FDR's victory and the time it would be inaugurated. In 1933, the 20th Amendment, which moved the presidential inaugurations to January, was not ratified until February 1933. So it couldn't put FDR in office sooner. However, FDR wasn't idle. Kind of like his distant cousin Teddy Roosevelt, he worked with a carefully picked team of advisors, professors, lawyers, journalists who became known as the Brain Trust. Quick to note that he also chose his advisors who would disagree with him, making sure that some of these people weren't yes men, and they wanted to really challenge the thought process of FDR. This is when FDR began to formulate his new set of policies for his administration. This new policy set to alleviate the problems of the Great Depression was called the New Deal. Then this nickname originated from a campaign speech when FDR promised a new deal for the American people. The New Deal policies focused on 3 general goals: relief for the needy, economic recovery, and financial reform. for a New Deal. Vote FDR. All right, hands on, not off. So Roosevelt knew that the New Deal, to be able to improve the economy, he first needed to establish Americans' confidence. His inauguration speech was one of the first steps to do so. He reminded Americans that their fears for the economic future were unfounded and concerned only material things. That's where he said the only thing you have to fear is fear itself. Immediately after taking office, FDR's administration launched a period of intense activity known as the 100 Days, lasting from March 9th to June 16, 1933. During this period, Congress passed more than 15 major pieces of New Deal legislation. These laws and others that followed significantly expanded the federal government's role in the nation's economy and in citizens' lives. They also changed the relationship between the federal and state governments. Roosevelt's first step was to reform banking and finance. And by 1933, which is the worst year of the Depression, the widespread bank failures that caused Americans to lose faith within the banking system. On March 5th, the day after taking office, FDR declared a bank holiday and closed all banks to prevent further withdrawals. Again, further withdrawals continued. More and more banks were losing money. When banks lose money, they close. So he will persuade Congress to pass the Emergency Banking Relief Act, which authorized the Treasury Department to inspect the country's banks. Those that were sound could reopen at once. Those that were insolvent, meaning they can't pay their debts, would remain closed. And those banks that needed help could receive loans. This measure revived public confidence in banks since customers now had a greater faith that the open banks were in good financial shape. Like what's going on now in the Silicon Valley Bank. If you don't believe me, check it out. So here's FDR signing the Emergency Relief Banking Act. All right, Fireside. Test question. March 12th, the day before the banks were to reopen, FDR gave the first of his many Fireside Chats, which are radio talks about issues of public concern, explaining in clear, simple language for his New Deal measures. These informal talks made Americans feel as if the president were speaking to them directly. Remember, everyone had a radio in their household. In his first chat, FDR took time to calm the Americans' fears about the bank crisis. He acknowledged that the closing of the banks had caused more stress and hardship, but he reassured his listeners that the banks would reopen and the American financial system would return as strong as ever. As FDR explained, the banking system was caused in large part by panic. When too many people demanded their savings in cash, banks would fail. This wasn't because the banks were weak, but because even strong banks could not meet such heavy demands. Over the next few weeks, Americans will return their savings back to the banks. And there's FDR, an older FDR giving a speech. All right, big teens. This whole slide is test chock full of test questions. Crazy. Congress took another step to reorganize the banking system by passing the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933. This act established the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC. The FDIC provided federal insurance for individual bank accounts up to $5,000, reassuring millions of bank customers that their money was safe. I believe that is now changed to $250,000, up to. It also required banks to act cautiously with their customers' money. Remember, can't invest in the stock market. Congress and the president also worked to regulate the stock market, which people had lost faith in since the crash in 1929. The Federal Securities Act, which required corporations to provide complete information on stock offerings, made them liable for any misrepresentations. So 1934, Congress created the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, to regulate the stock market. One goal of the SEC was to prevent people with inside information about companies from rigging the stock market for their own profit. In addition, the president persuaded Congress to approve a bill allowing for the manufacture, sale of some alcoholic beverages. The bill's main purpose was to raise government revenues by taxing alcohol, because before that time it hadn't been taxed. By the end of 1933, the 21st Amendment repealed prohibition altogether. So bye-bye 18th Amendment, prohibiting alcohol, the sale of alcohol. Now people can drink legally, and people are happy about that. Here's FDR signing another piece of legislation. I bet these people were getting tired of taking pictures with him because he did that a lot. More. Prohibition ends at last December 5th, 1933. The good old days are back. All right, rural assistance. While working on banking and financial matters, FDR's administration began to focus on other ways to stimulate economic recovery and to aid Americans. Having suffered the double blow of the drought of the Dust Bowl and the national economic crisis, farmers were perhaps the hardest hit by the Depression. The government soon implemented several rural assistance programs. The Agricultural Adjustment Act, the AAA, sought to raise crop prices by lowering production. Test question. The government achieved this goal by paying farmers to leave a certain amount of every acre of land unseeded. The theory was that this would reduce supply, would boost prices. In some cases, crops were too far advanced in the acreage reduction to take effect, so as a result, the government paid cotton growers $200 million to plow under 10 million acres of their crop. They will also pay hog farmers to slaughter 6 million pigs. These subsidies upset Americans who protested the destruction of food when many people were going hungry. It did, however, raise farm prices and put more money in farmers' pockets. Several New Deal programs focused specifically on the impoverished Tennessee River Valley. The TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority test question was ambitious. They renovated 5 existing dams and constructed 20 new ones, creating thousands of jobs and provided flood control, hydroelectric power, and other benefits to the region. The government also established the Cumberland homesteads in eastern Tennessee. There, hundreds of poor families resettled on small farms and worked in communities-owned businesses. The community never attracted enough good-paying jobs, and the venture ultimately failed. So here are some farmers getting some. You want me to plow up cotton? Sure, I'll take a smiley face picture. Electricity for all. All right. Another test question. Again, so many things happened, and it's big. It is big. This test is going to be massive. The administration who also established programs to provide relief through works projects and cash payments. Most importantly, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, put young men aged 18 to 25 to work. Members built roads, developed parks, planted trees, and helped in soil erosion and flood control projects. By the time the program had ended in 1942, almost 3 million young men passed through the CCC. They were paid a small wage, $30 a month, but 25 of that went back to their families at home. It also supplied free food, uniforms, and lodging in work camps. Many camps were located on the Great Plains, where within a period of 8 years, the CCC planted more than 200 million trees. This tremendous reforestation program was aimed at preventing another Dust Bowl. Another major CCC project took place in Florida, where the workers built the 100-mile overseas highway linking Miami to the Key West. And the railroad was destroyed by a 1935 hurricane, so that it needed to be replaced so they could link these two tourist destinations. The PWA, the Public Works Administration, was created in part with the National Industrial Recovery Administration, the NIRA. The PWA provided money to states to create jobs, chiefly in the construction of schools and other community buildings. When these programs failed to make a dent in employment, FDR established the CWA, Civil Works Administration, November 1933. It provided 4 million immediate jobs during the winter of 1933 and 1934. Critics of the CWA claimed that these programs were make-work projects and a waste of money. However, the CWA built 40,000 schools and paid the salaries of 50,000 school teachers in America's rural states. It also built more than 500,000 miles of roads. There's the CCC. There's the poster. The PWA. and the CWA. All right, more letters. So the NIRA also sought to promote industrial growth by establishing codes of fair practice for individual industries. It created the National Recovery Administration, the NRA, which set prices of many established products and standards. The aim of the NRA was to promote the recovery by interrupting the trend of wage cuts, falling prices, and layoffs, the goal of industrial planning. These codes of fair practice had been drafted in joint meetings of businesses and representatives, workers, and consumers. These codes limited the production and established prices. Because businesses were given new concessions, workers made demands. Congress will meet their demands by passing a section of the NIRA guaranteeing workers' rights to unionize and bargain collectively. Many businesses and politicians, however, criticized the NRA. Some charged that the codes served a large business interests and increased code violations elsewhere. A number of New Deal programs also concerned with housing and the home mortgage problems. The Homeowners Loan Corporation, HOLC, provided government loans to homeowners who faced foreclosure because they couldn't make their loan payments. In addition, the National Housing Act in 1934 created the Federal Housing Administration, FHA, which continues to furnish loans for home mortgages and repairs today. Another program, the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, FERA, was funded with $500 million to provide direct relief to the needy. Half of that money was given to states as direct grants and aid to help furnish food and clothing to the unemployed, the aged, and the ill. The rest was distributed to states to support work relief programs. For every $3 from the state program, the FERA donated $1. There's the NRA. Different from today's NRA. Homeowners Loan Corporation, FHA, FERA. All right, so by the end of the 100 days, millions of Americans had benefited from these New Deal programs. The public's confidence in the nation's future had rebounded as well. The government's policy of deficit spending more money than it receives in revenue, was stimulating economic recovery despite putting the government deep into debt. Oh, could they see today? With more of their own money in their hands, consumers could buy goods and services and thus fuel economic growth. Although FDR agreed to deficit spending, he did it reluctantly. He regarded it as a necessary evil to be used at a time of great economic crisis. Nevertheless, the New Deal did not end the Depression. Voice crack test question. It did not end the Depression. Opposition grew among some parts of the population. Liberal critics worried that the New Deal didn't go far enough to help the poor and reform the nation's economic system. Conservative critics argued that FDR's direct relief program would cost the government too much. They also believed that he would use the New Deal program to control business and socialize the economy. Conservatives were also particularly angered by such laws as the AAA and the NIRA, which they believed the federal government had too much power and control over agriculture and industry. Many of these critics believed that the New Deal would interfere with the workings of a free market economy. All the haters, the ops. Ooh, lots. Struck down. So by the mid-1930s, conservative opposition in the New Deal had received a boost by two Supreme Court decisions. In 1934, the NIRA, in 1935, I can't read, the NIRA was ruled as unconstitutional. It was declared that the law upset the established system of checks and balances by giving legislative powers to the executive branch. No. Additionally, the court said the enforcement of industry codes within states went beyond the federal government's constitutional powers to regulate interstate commerce. The next year, the court struck down the AAA on the grounds that agriculture is a local matter and should be regulated by the states rather than by the federal government. Test questions. You can bet your bottom dollar you'll see something like, why were some of these New Deal programs declared unconstitutional? There you go. All smoke. President Roosevelt feared that the further court decisions might dismantle the New Deal. To prevent such court action, in February 1937, he asked Congress to enact a court reform bill. If passed, the bill would recognize the federal judiciary, reorganize the federal judiciary, and allow FDR to appoint 6 new Supreme Court justices. Now, wait a minute. That seems a little authoritarian right there. Many observers who saw this bill as a clumsy effort FDR to pack the Supreme Court with friendly justices. They also viewed it as a dangerous attempt to upset the constitutional balance of the power, of the judicial power. Some of the Supreme Court's rulings had been based on the belief that the executive branch had usurped too much legislative power. The court reform bill would further shift the relationship between the branches, allowing the executive to use legislation to interfere with judicial independence. As it turned out, the president got his way without reorganizing the judiciary. 1937, an elderly justice retired, and FDR appointed the liberal Hugo Black, shifting the balance of the court. Rulings of the court began to favor the New Deal. And over the next 4 years, because of further resignations, FDR was able to appoint 7 new justices. So he didn't even need a new law reforming the judicial system. All right, Father Coughlin. In 1934, some of the strongest conservative opposition to the New Deal banded together to form the organization called the American Liberty League. The American Liberty League opposed the New Deal measures, but that it believed would violated the respect for the rights of individuals and property. 3 of the toughest critics the president faced, however, were 3 men who expressed views that appealed to the poor: Charles Coughlin, Dr. Francis Townsend, and Huey Long. Every Sunday, Father Francis Coughlin, a Roman Catholic priest from the suburb of Detroit, broadcasted radio sermons that combined economic, political, and religious ideas. He was initially a supporter of the New Deal, but soon Coughlin turned against Roosevelt. He favored a guaranteed annual income and the nationalization of banks. At the height of his popularity, Father Coughlin claimed a radio audience as many as 40 to 45 million people, but his anti-Semitic views eventually cost him support. Wonder why. So here you have him giving a speech, looks like in a baseball stadium. More ops. Another critic was Dr. Francis Townsend, a physician and health officer from Long Beach. Townsend believed that FDR wasn't doing enough to help the poor and elderly, so he devised a pension plan that would provide a monthly benefits to the aged. This plan had found a strong backing among the elderly and thus undermining the president's support, or the support for Roosevelt. Perhaps the most serious challenge in the New Deal came from Senator Huey Long of Louisiana. Like Coughlin, he too was an early supporter of the New Deal. Eager to win for the presidency himself, Long proposed a nationwide social program called Share Our Wealth. Under this banner slogan, "Every Man a King," he promised something for everyone. It was very popular and boasted having perhaps as many 27,000 Share Our Wealth clubs, with 7.5 million workers in those clubs. However, sadly, that same year, Huey Long would be assassinated. As the initial impetus of the New Deal began to wane, FDR looked ahead. He knew much more work was needed to be done to help the people and solve the nation's economic problems. That's Dr. Francis Townsend. Not Francis Townsend. What's his name? Yeah, his name is Francis Townsend. Francis Coughlin, Francis Townsend, Huey Long. All righty, that concludes our lecture. It was a little bit longer, more stuff to write about, but there's so much going on. It's crazy, especially trying to solve what was going on at the beginning to what happened in 1929 that started the Great Depression, and finally you have a president who's actually doing stuff. So thanks, FDR. All right, your homework is page 448. 448, questions 4 through 7. Yeah, you heard me, 4 through 7. That's still 4 questions, so not too bad. Anyways, hopefully you guys did enjoy. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.